absolutely delighted to have Dr. Grigory Nemria with us today, chairman of the Human Rights Committee in the Ukrainian Rada. Grigory also serves as the deputy head of the All-Ukrainian Union Fatherland Party. He has been elected to the Rada since beginning of October 2012, re-elected in 2014, and prior to that he served as the deputy prime minister responsible for European and international integration from 2007 to 2010, and has certainly spent a great deal of his professional time thinking about how to integrate Ukraine into the West. And then after Grigory provides us with his remarks, we're going to turn to Dr. Sergei Makadonov, director of the Department for Problems of Ethnic Relations at the Institute for...
Let me interrupt you a little bit, because now I'm teaching for the Russian State University for the Humanities.
Great.
Yeah.
I love updating bios.
Sorry.
No, I'm so glad you do. Associate professor at the Department of Regional
Studies and Foreign Policy, yeah.
And Foreign Policy at the Russian State University for the Humanities. Humanities, exactly. But Sergei is a prolific writer on the North Caucasus and someone we turn to constantly to help us understand those dynamics. So Sergei, thank you for that update. I appreciate that. And without further ado, let me turn the floor over to Grigory for his comments.
Thank you very much, and thank you reminding us that we have spent some valuable time at the CSIS, and I'm very honored to be today at the Atlantic Council. I think a very dynamic institute with the program dedicated to Ukraine, which is an important part of the effort not to allow Ukraine to be lost from the radar screens. And as I'm speaking today now, I'm probably the only one in this audience, if not, please correct me, who was born and spent almost half of my life in Donetsk. So this is my hometown. And there are two places called Donetsk. One in Ukraine, which is the capital of Donbass, a city that used to be with more than 1 million inhabitants. And there is this small town called Donetsk on the Russian side, just 15 or 20 minutes walking distance from the border. This town now is known as a place where the show trial on Nadezhda Savchenko is going on. So we have two Donetsks, but with a different, probably, fate. And I want to... Also today, I cannot but mention that while Minsk is not about Crimea, we have to not to allow of Crimea illegal annexation being forgotten, especially when the Russian leadership is trying to show that this is the case. But now let me address the Minsk, the expectations, the organizing idea. And I very much appreciate that Sergei would be able to present his view as a very much respected academician of the regional and the regionalism issue in what used to be called post-Soviet space. But I agree with Sergei when he mentioned in one of his publications there is no such thing anymore like a post-Soviet space. I believe this is a very important observation which I totally share. The organizing idea of Minsk. We believe that Minsk was not about peace. Minsk was not about war. Minsk is about neither war nor peace. This is a hybrid arrangement, hybrid process, hybrid format, which fits perfectly to the phenomena of the hybrid war, which is also not exactly a classical war. We have to keep this in mind to be very clear about the expectations of the party. And I would like also to refer to the assessment of Minsk by a very reputable British diplomat who spent a lot of his career in Brussels, working for Mr. Solana and others, who said in most recent commentary to the Financial Times that text of the Minsk is so unclear as to be almost unintelligible. A year later, none of it has been implemented. So the question we could and should ask, how one could implement what is unintelligible? One could refer this, but this is a famous European constructive ambiguity exercise. Yes, sometimes constructive ambiguity is helpful. But this is, Minsk is the case of destructive ambiguity. Because if the goal of the Minsk process is peace, this is one thing. But we believe that it's neither peace nor war. In some offices, both in Washington and in Europe, when you go to some diplomats in their offices, you see on the wall a sign that reads, "Keep calm and love Minsk." So I prefer, if I would come within this issue, conflict we are talking about, another sign, "Keep calm and love Budapest," meaning Budapest Memorandum. That would be, I think, a much more consistent with the intention to address the conflict, which is not about Donbass, which is not about Ukraine. It is about Europe, it is about the United States, it's about Russia, and it's about leadership in the world, which is changing very quickly. If this is about the leadership, I think the important point to address is to what extent and who exercises the leadership within the Minsk process. The previous panel tried to answer this question with a mixed result. But I think the agreement was, and I support this, that it is a pity that neither United States nor European Union are present in the table. And I also would like to agree with the point Sergei made in one of his articles, that without the United States present in the negotiating table, it would be, I quote you, "Все переговорные форматы," all negotiating formats between EU, Russia, and Ukraine, without the United States, cannot be efficient. I respect and totally support this point of view, and this is also part of the answer if Minsk is not delivering, and it's difficult to expect it to deliver, then what should be done beyond Minsk? Of course, we will not be able to provide an answer now, but I believe we have to keep this in mind. Come closer to the Minsk. If you read Minsk attentively, so you cannot leave it without an impression that according to Minsk, to its letter, there are two sides that's supposed to find a compromise. The one side is the Ukrainian government, and the other side is self-proclaimed leaders of Donbass. Because Russia, within the context of Russian reading of Minsk, France and Germany are not sides. They're, in the interpretation, either mediators or sometimes definition of guarantors, especially after the Paris meeting, used, invoking the so-called Paris guarantees on the Minsk implementation. Frankly, I don't know what does it mean, but clearly it's positioning 3 out of 4 leaders within the Minsk context as mediators or guarantors. So, which means, by definition, that if Russia does not consider itself part of the conflict, then it does not feel that it has an obligation to fulfill. And then it comes to the neuralgic point, the major neuralgic point of the root cause of the conflict. Whether it is the root cause of this conflict is internal, domestic or it's external? I firmly believe that it is external. That's why the issue of border is so sensitive. And that's why the Minsk II was strongly and rightly criticized, that it didn't address the issue of the external border at the first place. Now what we have, in addition to this, misplacing root cause and then creating a hybrid framework that aim neither solving the issue of war or peace, but to perpetual instability, then we come to a question, what the plan, how to move out of this mess. So which is a right issue to ask, especially that after these years, we have almost 10,000 dead, almost 2 million internally displaced persons in Ukraine, and many people who feels that they don't have a future. This is the most difficult issue to answer. One could continue to repeat mantra, Minsk is the only game in a town. There is no alternative to Minsk. Yeah, probably for operational purposes, it has some value to concentrate, to give a benefit of the doubt, and try to extract from Minsk what it could deliver. And I think we have to be very serious about what Minsk could deliver or would not. The original sin or Achilles heel of Minsk was putting in one basket two things that's always better to keep separately. Security-driven agenda, namely ceasefire, withdrawal of troops, weapons, and the monitoring and verification of that security-driven agenda. But in addition to this obvious security package that involves and aims the ambition of this package to reach a comprehensive peaceful solution, has been intertwined in a very haphazard, unintelligent way into the Minsk text. So we have two in one. And now we are three of us at least in this panel are hostages of this destructive ambiguity when security package and the political package aimed to the search of the comprehensive peaceful solution were put in one basket. So my point, and I would stop at this page, I think we could extract most from the Minsk when we really try to extract what the Minsk should be about. It's about security, it's about ceasefire, and it's about delivering, stopping killing people. So, but then we should come to a separate issue, how to reach a comprehensive peaceful solution, and which should address with the whole responsibility the issue of the root cause and what needs to be done internally to support when and if the root cause will be addressed in the most efficient way.
Thank you, Gregory. Those are wonderful comments. Sergei.
Thank you, Heather. First of all, let me express my sincere gratitude for having me here as a contributor. I am glad our today panel is a community of former and current CSIS persons. I spent more than 3 years at CSIS, being visiting fellow at Russia-Eurasia program. It was a very prolific time to have discussion, exchange, and so on. But for the 2 latest years, at least, we have a clear lack of dialogues. We have different monologues in Russia, in the West, Ukraine, 3 at least monologues, not dialogues. This is why thank you so much. At the same time, this panel today, we have the other community. My distinguished colleague, Grigory, mentioned his biography, career development with Donbass. I'm from Rostov-on-Don. I was born there in 1972, and my first...
We're neighbors.
Yeah, absolutely. And Of course, yes. And my first trip to Donbass was paid at the age of 3.5 years. First trip to Moscow, in comparison, was paid at the age of 13. This is why I know well situation in Donbass in particular, in Ukraine in general. What's point of agreements and disagreements? First point of agreement, of course. I completely agree with Grigory that Minsk agreement is not enough to resolve the Ukrainian crisis and the conflict. As for Russian objectives in the Ukrainian crisis, in my mind, they split it into three basic dimensions. The first one is about not Ukraine, not Russia. My second point of agreement with Grigory, it's about European security and European leadership, because before the Ukrainian crisis of 2013, 2014, and afterwards didn't discover tensions between the West and Russia. It sharpened contradictions, tensions, and so on. They were, and there are, of course, about European security. And of course, Russia could not agree with European security identified like NATO security and EU security, like process of consistent enlargement of NATO towards Russian borders, with no taking into serious account Russian concerns, of course. Before 2014, Russia pretended to be part of the Western world. Russia did a lot to be integrated. After situation changed, and now I am not sure what direction will be dominating in mid-term, short-term perspective, but it was failure of hopes to be part of the Western world, of civilized world. Our opinion of Russia was very different from the West in terms of estimate of results of the Cold War, because Russia perceived this result like a personal decision to give up burden of the arms raisings and so on. But the West considered the same situation like victory. And coming from the first set to the second set, Crimea, of course. It's not only Russian-Ukrainian tensions, of course. It's about identity. It's about development of the post-Soviet space. And one of my provocative thesis, intellectually, of course.
It doesn't exist.
Excuse me, let me a little bit correct you. I really wrote an article, Goodbye Post-Soviet Space. I told about fragmentation and change of the post-Soviet space. After Crimea, after Donbass, this post-Soviet space became different from previous one. But it doesn't mean it doesn't exist right now, because we all former USSR republics are united by the agenda addressing to the past. Decommunization, communization, Stalin legacy, borders established in the Soviet time artificially, and so on and so on. We could not overcome this agenda. Until nowadays, the USSR collapse as a historical process, not judicial process, is not completely finished. Because we have disputed identities, contested sovereignties, self-proclaimed entities, and so on and so on. And it's not only about Russian intervention or evil will. I'm not Russian official, of course. I'm not ready, and I'm not going to deny the Russian intervention both in Crimea and Donbass. It would be naive at least. But it's necessary to understand that these situations, both situations, have a different or various dimensions. I'm repeating once again about identity. Because Crimea now is not handkerchief, which you could take from one pocket and to put to another one. There is opinion of 2 million people living there who received Russian passport and so on. It's impossible to ignore. It's not bad, it's not good. It's necessary to understand, to take it into the serious account. We can discuss about particularities, commonalities between Donbass, Crimea, Abkhazia, and so on, but it's necessary to understand also opinions of people living on the ground. They could be right, they could be wrong. But it's necessary at least to understand the situation. The set number 2 is about Crimea. The set number 3 about Donbass. Let me clarify this situation, the position of Russia and situation around Minsk. You know, very well-known truism maybe that policy is an art of opportunities or possibilities of possible approach. Of course, Minsk agreement is not the best solution. It contains a lot of contradictions. Me and my students make exercises. We read these documents, updated Madrid principles. I prefer in my classes to address to sources to understand what we mean, speaking about Minsk, because many people repeat like mantra that no alternatives to Minsk and so on, but they didn't really read these documents. A lot of contradiction. On one side, restoration of Ukrainian control over Donbas border, and the other point about comprehensive resolution of political resolution of this conflict, and no mechanism, which point would be first, which would be second, no order. No clear procedure, you know, that democracy is a procedure, first of all. But it's necessary to understand that this situation reflects a balance of forces in the region and outside of Donbass in European security, because all sides have maximalist requirements. Максималистские планки in Russian, yeah? Maximalist requirements, demands. For Ukrainian side, the sweeping out separatist and repetition of Serbian Krajina case is an option. It's not my conspiracy theories and so on. Many officials, including Yuri Lutsenko, openly said that Serbian Krajina is a pattern, by the way. The problem of Russian officials, they are good students. They learned brilliantly lessons from the Balkans, when unilateral approach was dominant. And Russia considers Crimea and Donbass not like something unique, but something like event within chain of events. Because annexation is a method of change of the borders. In the case of Kosovo, of course, no annexation. Kosovo didn't become 51st state of the United States or province of Albania. But let's imagine that US, NATO didn't intervene militarily in this situation. I'm not sure that Albanians would be successful. The same with Croats. If Croats wouldn't be supported by Helmut Kohl, who mentioned necessary divorce between two nations who didn't love each other, excuse me, maybe we would discuss the other Yugoslavian scenario and so on. No annexation, of course, but there was change of the borders, using military force and so on and so on. Because for Russia, what's the red line in Donbass? No sweeping, separatist and military defeat. Any other options? Yes, let's discuss. Because Russia is not happy and would not be happy to have Donbass as a part of Russia. Unlike Transnistria, it's territory with about 4 million people population. About 60% of them are pensioners. Now we suffer from the crisis. Of course, our economy is not looking like Obama said, разорванные в клочья. It's not quite true. But we also have a lot of troubles. And 60% of Donbass pensioners would not be great happiness for Russia, of course. But Russia considers the Donbass situation like something similar to Greater Bosnia, like counterweight to Ukrainian desires to be part of European Union, NATO, and so on. And Donbass is considered like counterbalance, counterweight. As for the West, of course, the West is not happy from the Russian activities in Ukraine and the post-Soviet space. It's perceived like re-Sovietization. Of course, it's not about ideology. Russia is not building communism, is not ready to export communist values all over the world, and so on. But it's about competition in Eurasia. You know that doctrine of Wolfowitz doctrine, was not denied and was not confirmed at the same time. It was about Eurasian competitors to United States. Nothing personal. I understand United States' reason in this conflict. It's not about Russophobia. It's not about anti-Putinism and so on. It's about precedent. Because American people are brought up on the Anglo-Saxon law, yes? It's about precedents. If Russia could create unilateral precedent of reconsidering of former USSR borders, who knows? What's about China tomorrow? What's about India? Maybe India tomorrow would annex Bangladesh and so on. Who knows? Or Turkey will proclaim Northern Cyprus like new Il province of Turkey in the framework of new Osmanism, new Ottomanism, and so on. Who knows? This is why it's kind of insurancy of the United States. I understand the reasons, and at the same time it's necessary to understand Russian reasons, because the post-Soviet space is not something about imperial revival or Soviet revival. many problems in the post-Soviet space have direct influence on the Russian domestic agenda. If we deployed 80% of our Black Sea Fleet in Sebastopol, it was not about Stalin. It was not about Ushakov and Suvorov. Ushakov and Suvorov were not completely stupid guys, of course, choosing Sebastopol haven like a haven for the Russian Black Sea Fleet. It was true. You can say that your Black Sea Fleet is weaker than even the weakest US naval fleet. Yes, of course. But speaking, let me transfer to Russian. It's better to represent adequate situation. Дурак не дурак, но свою пятерку в день имею. Yes, maybe I'm not completely stupid or completely stupid, but I have my $5 every day.
Rubles.
Rubles, yeah. For $5, 5 rubles, yeah.
That exchange rate's a little hard right
Okay, and these base played a significant role in some regional conflicts like civil war in Georgia in 1993 or situation in 2008 for 5 days war. This is why, yes, it's important. And Minsk agreement reflects maybe impossibility to realize maximalist requirements of different sides. Yes, Donbass guys would be happy from repetition of Abkhaz scenario or South Ossetian scenario or maybe multiplication of Crimean experience. Kremlin could not agree with this position and so on. Every side engaged in the conflict have and had maximalist requirement, and Minsk reflects this one. Yeah, it's maybe compromise. Compromise ensuring maybe decrease of the hostilities, but not resolution, of course. And as for resolution, and coming back to the main question of your round table, I'm not sure that Minsk agreement itself, with no taking into account wider context, would be a sustainable way to the resolution. My third point of agreement with Grigory about Ukrainian crisis, about resolution of this conflict. Of course, conflict in Donbass is a separate case. It's a private case of wider problems. And in my mind, it's easier to maybe not stop to decrease hostilities, maybe stop hostilities, to launch ceasefire, to freeze the conflict. But from time to time, we would come back to the problem of the Russian engagement in the European security. We heard a lot of words about Cold War legacy. In my mind, after the end of the Cold War, principles proclaimed by Lord Ismay, US in, Germany down, Russia out, are still alive. Not changing the situation, we will reproduce problems like South Ossetia, Abkhazia, Donbass, everywhere. This is why it's necessary to discuss the role of Russia in the European security architecture, the engagement of Russia. I'm not so naive thinking that Russia would be part of NATO or European Union, not of course. But it's necessary to launch format when arguments of NATO or European Union or the West in general would be equal than Russian concerns and so on. And results of the European security and future of the European security architecture would be a result of compromises between two sides. Not like format teachers, students. It's a key prerequisite for the Ukrainian crisis, for the Georgian crisis, and so on. And not liquidating key prerequisite. Of course, we would make very tactical progress. And of course, the one more point about identities, because we are ready to repeat like mantra words about territorial integrity of Ukraine, Georgia, Moldova, and so on. Okay, okay.
Or Russia.
Russia also, yeah, it's the other story. I'm ready to speak about territorial integrity of Russia for many hours. Please, if you would have some questions, ask me. I am ready. Because I was in Chechnya last year and I regularly publish articles about it. I can compare some cases. It's the other story. But speaking about territorial integrity, if we recognize, I'm ready to recognize territorial integrity of Georgia and Ukraine. But in this way, we should take care about different parts of this country having another opinion on NATO, on European security and so on. If Abkhazia is a part of Georgia, Abkhaz people are not ready to see NATO like guarantor of their stability, safety and security. This is why, please, take into the account this position. People in Transnistria do the same. People in Crimea the same. It's not necessary to differentiate people into some levels. Level number 1, class number 1, and class number 2, Vatniki, and so on. No. All people are created equal, yes? As they put it in the American Constitution. Yes, of course, great. This is why let's follow this principle. It's very important, by the way, speaking about resolution of the conflict, because in many cases we identify a resolution of the conflict like withdrawal of Russia. It's not true. The same with European security, like identification with NATO enlargement, EU enlargement. Conflict resolution, like Russia go away. No. Too big to fail, yeah? Too big to be ignored. This is why it's very important. And last not least point about alternatives to Minsk and so on. I'm a historian by my education. Of course, there are alternatives always. Military decision, no war, no peace, many alternatives. My fourth point of agreement with Grigory. Yes, alternative exists. The problem of quality of these alternatives, consequences of their realization. Thank you so much, and now I'm ready for your questions, notes, comments. Thank you.
Well, Sergei, Gregory, thank you so much. You've given us an enormous amount of food for thought. Sergei, as you were talking, I was thinking, particularly as you're a historian, I remember a quote, there's nothing more unpredictable than Russian history. And sort of the selective use of that history.
And it's difficult to predict, especially the future.
Exactly, indeed, indeed. I know, Grigory, you would like to provide some response back to Sergei's comments. Let me just, if I can throw out the moderator's question, and then I'm mindful of the time, and I know we've got lots of thoughts that are going to want to be expressed from the audience. Gregory, I want to pull a little bit of your theory that the Minsk agreement is actually part of a larger hybrid approach. And so my theory of the crime is that, in fact, these ceasefires are designed to solidify frozen conflicts. And the West is actually a willing and able complicit ally in this, because no one is against ceasefires. No one is against a diplomatic process. But as we've seen, not only with the Minsk process, even when there's U.S. participation in the Geneva process with the Georgia-Russia conflict, the ceasefire lines have continued to be pushed out. No one has said a peep about those borders being pushed out. We have a 6+2 process for Transnistria. We have a Minsk group process for Nagorno-Karabakh. These processes are designed to freeze it because there is no desire to solve it. In some ways, because the security and the resolution are inherently connected. So in fact, we have got to get ourselves out of this process and into looking at alternatives. The other comment I will have, and I heard this a little bit in the latter part of the first panel, my problem, Sergei, is that we cannot have equivalency in this discussion. Russia illegally annexed and invaded another country. Full stop for all the other reasons. We have made this, and the 2-year anniversary to me is we've created parity. And when we create parity, then we've lost our sense of what this is about. It gets back to your European security question and the Anglo-Saxon. You're absolutely right. If borders and territorial integrity is no longer sacrosanct, we do have a very different international legal system and order. You're absolutely right, and that is a broader conversation. But if we're putting equivalency to the two parties, and this is where I think our French and German colleagues have made a fatal error in that equivalency part, and then we get back to the flaws of the agreement itself. And absolutely welcome to disagree with my theory of the crime. But we need to start understanding actually how these ceasefire and processy things make us feel better because it gets us out of the headlines. Deaths are reduced, and we have a diplomatic process that we can all point to that's a road to nowhere. But Ukraine is actually giving us the inconvenient truth of it's actually not going away. It continues to fester itself. So that's my provocative contribution as moderator. But Grigory, I'll let you have at it. I know Sergei's ready to get in, and then we've got to bring our audience.
Thank you. It was very stimulating, and I would like with the frozen conflicts. I think the important part of this frozen conflicts that it's conflicts. The point that you freeze doesn't mean that you solve the conflicts. And then the size matters. So with Nagorno-Karabakh also could not be and should not be put as equivalent. In terms of proximity and the size of Ukrainian situation, right? Which is not, I don't agree with Ukrainian crisis definition. But the size, the scale, and the proximity of Ukraine as a country with more than 40 million to EU borders matters. So that's why there should not be any equivalent in terms of kind of triumphalism, in terms of at least it's frozen, that it's half solved. Not at all. And I think Mr. Quinn Judge also pointed out there are some talks about the potential resumption. And one could speculate, and there are very rumors, and the rumors are something like people sometimes pay attention, that it is not excluded that the conflict could be again heated up sometime either in May or at the time of the Olympics in Rio. So, which again brings you the whole 2008 Georgia thing. But the point is, and I would like to address it from the different perspective. I studied a lot in Donetsk, which is probably next to impossible, the theory of arms control. And in arms control, and the time of the disarmament or the arms control exercise, there are such things as multiple independently targetable re-entry vehicles. Ballistic missiles, which has one launcher, but the missiles could target various targets. So what we have, if you employ this comparison, we have with Donbass, and that's why it calls for a broader view, not narrow view. We have a basic pattern when something has been used and probably is going to be used to achieve the goal. The goal of Mr. Putin, I believe, it's not to get Donbass. It's not about territory. It's about creating a zone of instability that allows Russia, because of its escalation dominance, because its willingness to spend political and not just political capital to maintain this zone of instability, to project this instability further. And within Ukraine, it firstly, and you mentioned the European security arrangement and the future of Europe, basically, what we have, what is under the threat, the future of Europe. And this is something that needs to be addressed as such, not just a narrow, limited to eastern Ukraine. Because if you use this comparison, then we have Syria. So it's basically the same issue. There are some immediate interests in terms of the military base, naval base there, electronic intelligence base, and the Black Sea Fleet as it was in Crimea. But the ambition is broader. The goal is broader. Therefore, even this observation calls for a much broader participants in the negotiating table. I commend to a very important role that Germany plays, and personally Chancellor Merkel. And it is important to continue to play this role, especially as far as the future of sanctions are concerned. Because if sanctions could be something that could start rolling back, that would be self-defeating. That would not be just lost of Ukraine. It would be self-defeating for Europe, for the West. That's why the unity in maintaining these sanctions are so much important. But to continue this comparison with the action that has different goals, I would like to point out to the points where we disagree with Sergei. I'm very pleased that Sergei, as a good neighbor, reciprocated with the points which I mentioned. We tend to agree. But where we disagree, and I want for the clarity to also mention this, Sergei seems to believe that there are much more reason for this crisis that are domestic. He talked about identity, and I read attentively many articles, good quality articles written by Sergei, that Maidan apparently changed this delicate balance that the Ukrainian leadership used to keep, and that produced this response from the eastern Ukrainian from East Ukraine, from Donbass. I don't agree with this. Or when language is mentioned as a marker or one of the conflicting points. Read the most recent NDI poll, and I could provide you many others, where what people consider as a major concern, 1%. Language considered as the source of their concern, even less. So it's never been an issue for conflict that could lead to the military conflict. So this is where we disagree. It's not so much domestic. Its major reason, root cause, is external. And as you confirmed, because when you started to provide parallels with Kosovo, with Balkans, you immediately basically said that this is a larger pattern of the current Russian leadership positioning in the post-Cold War world. This is the issue. And the Minsk is not suitable to address this issue. Therefore, if Minsk is not about getting peace established, but it's about getting neither war nor peace, then Putin is not interested to get Minsk fulfilled, because it's not his goal. It's not a peace plan to start with. Ukraine, and we heard some analysis of that, consider Minsk as a poison pill that would lead to defragmentation of the country and would put an end to its existence as an independent sovereign state. And then we have a major third issue, which also we have to deal with, and you rightfully put again in one of your articles, that Russia is currently the only guarantor of the mere existence, I quote, of the Donetsk People's Republic, so-called Donetsk People's Republic, and the Lugansk People's Republic. So instead of being one of the three guarantors of Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty according to Budapest, and the largest neighbor of Ukraine, Russia now violated territorial integrity and sovereignty of Ukraine, annexing Crimea, occupying part of Donbass, and becoming a guarantor of the self-proclaimed leadership in Donetsk and Lugansk. This is the core issue. Unless this issue is not addressed, that all others are misleading, refocusing attention to the secondary issues, which would not bring a sustainable, peaceful solution.
Sergei, I'm going to let you unload in just a second, but I do want to get a couple of questions, and then I'm going to let you have first. I'm just being very mindful of the time, and then Grigory, I'll have you have the last word. So I see Uli Speck. If you could please identify yourself,
Germany
please.
voice.
And,
Germany speaking.
Yes, yes, exactly. The German perspective,
but not
please.
on behalf of Germany. I just want to say I'm with Ulrich Speck with the Transatlantic Academy. I think, so you said Russia is not party to the Minsk agreement, Minsk II. I think through the sanctions, it is, because the sanctions have been clearly linked to the fulfillment of Minsk. And therefore, everybody assumes that Russia is party to that conflict. Otherwise, there would not be no sanctions on Russia linked to the Minsk agreement. Formally, Russia is morphing in one role and the other. That's one point I would like to make. The other, or one question: don't you think this? It's obvious that Russia is part of that process agreement. The other is Minsk. In my view, and I'm sorry I haven't been with the first panel, but that's also the view in Berlin and in Brussels. I think it's a process. Which is open-ended, and it's not so much about a peace agreement, it's rather about whether which side can prevail in that process. So I understand that for Ukraine is a problem, and it would like to see a different process, but that's the one you have. So how can you improve your position in that competition over what Minsk means? Does it mean Russian control of Ukraine via Donbass, via the constitutional process? Or does it mean, and this is what Merkel has said again and again, Minsk is about giving Ukraine its border back. So we have two competing interpretations, and what can Ukraine do to improve its position in this beauty contest. Thanks.
Thank you. I see a question over there. Right back there. Yes, thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm Nikolai Vorobyov, Ukrainian journalist. I have a quick question about the Minsk memorandum, and maybe somebody can answer to this. So, do you know the origins of the memorandum, where it comes from? Because we are discussing here a big issue, but where it comes from? Because according to my sources, it was written by some officers among Ukrainian army and separatists to launch the ceasefire. And then we observed like continuation. So where the Minsk memorandum comes from, that's the direct question. And what's the perspectives? Then that's how we can determine its perspectives, because the information is quite controversial. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Just we have one. I'll take one more here, and then we'll turn the floor back over to Sergei and Grigory. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Justin Tomczyk, U.S. Ukraine Foundation. We all agree that Russia is intervening in Ukraine. However, the Minsk agreement does not mention Russian responsibility at all. Is the agreement doomed as long as Russia is not held responsible for its actions? Thank you.
Thank you. And this is sort of my last question, if you can weave it in. So let's pull out a little bit on alternatives. So could there be a Minsk III? Could the diplomatic format be enlarged? Could there be, and then what would the conditions, I mean, clearly the reason that Minsk II was created because Minsk I utterly collapsed. Does Minsk II have to collapse? And how does that collapse look? And then give us some visions of what a potential alternative, maybe I won't even say the Minsk III, maybe we'll get out of that rut a little bit, talk about an alternative. So Sergei, you've been so patient, let it loose.
Thank you, Heather. You raised a lot of questions. Each of them requires at least series of very solid articles, maybe.
Yeah, you got 5 minutes.
Couple of monographs. Yeah, I have only 5 minutes. Okay, about Minsk III and perspective of its appearing. If the Minsk II will be completely failed, if we will have growing violations of ceasefire, growing hostilities, the question of Minsk III would be appeared, of course. As for Minsk first, which was collapsed, not completely, because it's necessary to especially note that all sides engaged in the Minsk process and beyond of it appealed to Minsk I. Even it violated a lot of times. No denials of Minsk I. This is why diplomatically, of course, it was not collapsed. It was collapsed on the ground, or violated on the ground a lot of times, provoking the second Minsk. As for question about from where Minsk come through, it's necessary to differentiate the first one and the second, of course, very different, because the second, it was joint idea of Moscow, France, and Berlin. As for United States, I really believe that without United States, the comprehensive resolution is impossible, because this country is country number one. We can admire it, we can hate United States, but it's reality of this situation right now. And even United States didn't sign Minsk agreement, it will participate. It's understandable that before signing second Minsk, Angela Merkel visited Washington, discussed the situation and so on. Those discussions will be continued, of course. Let me react on your thesis about equivalency and so on and so on. You concentrate only on the fact of Russian intervention. Yes, I can agree with you that it was violation of Budapest Memorandum and big agreement of 1997, ratified in 1999. But it's a part of the problem. Grigory criticized me that I stressed more on, disagreed with me a little bit, a bit. That I stressed on the domestic dimension. In my mind, it's rather artificial to oppose domestic issues and external engagement. This Ukrainian crisis covers domestic issue. Of course, situation of Maidan, what did it mean? In my point of view, it was a destruction of monopoly on violation in this country. It was very real. And this fact is recognized not only by me or by my Russian colleagues, but distinguished Ukrainian scholars, like Sergei Kudela. He is from Lviv, by the way. He is professor of Baylor University. Problem of legitimacy of new power. As for external engagement, excuse me, I study ethnopolitical conflicts for 2 decades. Every ethnopolitical conflict, territorial dispute, has external engagement. Be it Cyprus, Israeli-Palestine conflict, Balkans, and so on. Every conflict, because it influences on interest of neighbors, remote actors, and so on. And coming back to the question of equality of responsibilities and so on. Russia intervened Ukraine, yes, but 2/3 of Ukrainian troops deployed in the peninsula changed immediately their loyalty. It's data not of Russian sources. Then Deputy Minister of Defense of Ukraine, Mr. Polyakov, confirmed this fact. Even Commander-in-Chief of Ukrainian Navy's Admiral Berezovsky changed its loyalty. Now he's Deputy of Commander-in-Chief of the Russian Black Sea Fleet in Sevastopol, by the way. It's also part of the issue. Problem of loyalty, problem of identity, and so on. As for the Balkans, I am repeating once again, Operation Serbia and Krajina was impossible without unilateral, military, consistent approach of the West. It was also attack, military attack. Kosovo was operation of NATO with no resolution of Security of Council of UN. It was also military attack with no annexation, yes. It's different. But it's kind of hypocrisy to see that Kosovo case was unique because of international engagement. Excuse me, international engagement is not the same as American engagement. In the case of Chinese or Indonesian engagement, maybe resolution of the Kosovo crisis will be a little bit different. International doesn't mean American. It's necessary to understand. In the case of Abkhazia, in the case of Crimea, we have also international engagement, Russian engagement, yes. It was international. Yeah, it's because Crimea was not part of Russia before 2014, the same with Abkhazia and South Ossetia. We can discuss instruments of violation of borders or a violation of balance of forces. Annexation, military attack, military operation, humanitarian intervention, so on, blah, 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 and so on. But they are instruments, not principles, not basic goals. It's a discussion about hammer and nail. Hammer is good or nail is good. Yeah, maybe you can find problems. In my mind, the annexation, of course, was a risk and is a risk for Russia. And I told about it many times. Personally, me, when I talked with our guys in Towers, I proposed that time in my references some Abkhaz or Transnistrian variant in this situation, maybe recognition of Crimean People's Republic and so on, but not fact of annexation. Because personally, me, understanding a clear difference between the Caucasus and Ukraine. For the West, Ukraine is a red line. As for Caucasus, I can imagine a situation when Russia will capture Tbilisi or even Baku, no reaction. I understand it. The West will be tolerable. Now, cynically speaking, but I'm realist. I don't like to speak about values, blah, 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 and so on. I have a very rich experience, field experience for 20 years. Chechnya, Karabakh, Tajikistan, I understand. We have Eurocentric agenda here. No discussion on Tajikistan. In Tajikistan, 100,000 people were killed for 5 years. No attention, no serious conferences about it. Maybe in the context of Afghanistan, but not like proper problem. But Ukraine, excuse me, it's a part of Europe. It's a center of Europe. This is why a lot of attention to this situation. No tolerance to Russian activities, especially here. But Russia did it. Now we have what we have. We can say no business as usual. Yes, great. Offer your business. New kind of business. It's not as serious to speak than some candidates in Washington say, I am not going to speak with President Putin. Okay, please don't talk with the leader of nuclear power covering 1/8 of the globe. Yes, maybe it's good. But it's not a way out in this situation. It's not justification. We live in one boat, as Mikhail Gorbachev said. Yeah? We are in the same boat. It's necessary to understand it. It's necessary to understand that maybe Russian disproportionate answer or violation of course, I understand, I agree with the facts of violation, as also a result of some mistakes made by the West previously for 25 years before. It's necessary also to analyze, to make reflection of the situation.
Thanks,
Thank
Sergei. I'll let you have the last word. We're running a little late, so let you have the last word. The benediction, as we say.
Yeah, as a neighbor, and Sergei referred to the Soviet past, So remember that in the Soviet football league, there are two teams from Rostov, one called Sportivny Klub Armii,
SKA.
the central club of Army Rostov-na-Donu, and Shakhtar Donetsk. Shakhtar Donetsk. Shakhtar used to be much more successful in terms of...
In 70s and 60s, SKA was more successful.
Yeah, but that was a peaceful game. The point is now we don't have any more a peaceful game. So I used to come with my parents, my father, for Rostov Oblast because to catch crayfishes. Very pleasant trips, so all that. But I never expected that from the other side, from Rostov or others, tanks will come to my Donetsk. So this is, I think, the point which could not make me very impartial. But I want to just share observation from our past. And I believe that we all share a piece. The alternatives. I think we try, and at least it would be logical, and I appreciate pointing out that the practical arrangement that we have so far is Minsk. There is no others. While there were some attempts to involve, and it showed futile efforts to involve a positive role of such international organizations like the United Nations, for example, or others. But Minsk is so far. So what can we extract from Minsk? The first thing I mentioned, I want to repeat. I think the important, beneficial for all, and first of all, to limit, if not to end, human losses, to concentrate on the security conditions. In full, with a very, very open mind and forthcoming position as far as the international verification and monitoring is concerned. That requires uninterrupted access of the OSCE, while I agree, and Russian colleagues frequently call OSCE a vegetarian organization, but still a full uninterrupted access to the observers, 525 now, from this vegetarian organization. If it's vegetarian, why to be scared? So then to all the parts of this territory that Ukrainian government
Vegetarian,
does not control.
not vegan organization.
And also to the border. I think this is an important, which we should push, all parties should push for the Minsk to deliver. Second, and the question was about Minsk Memorandum, but Minsk Memorandum is 2014. Minsk Accords, which we are talking about now, Minsk II, is about 2015. And in 2015, the Minsk Accords were accompanied by declaration. And this is the only document where we have the authorities of 4 presidents: France, Germany, Russia, and Ukraine. And there is one line in this declaration that could show a direction to move. And I quote, this is declaration on the 12th of February, when those 4 presidents stated their commitment, quote, to undertake all possible individual and joint measures for a peaceful settlement, and reaffirmed their full respect for Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. So it gives you an idea of what plus could be, either on individual basis or joint measures. So Minsk is not straitjacket. If we consider Minsk as a straitjacket, we currently will continue to be a hostage of something which is not implementable by definition, because it was not meant to be implemented, because the goal was different. So then we could come to the next, and I'm afraid that we do not have time anymore to talk about this, what this plus could be, or beyond Minsk. I believe there is life beyond Minsk.
Yeah.
And we should keep calm and also love something that beyond Minsk, not just Minsk. Last but not least, I think with all due respect, and Sergei as an academician could allow himself to be within the strongly realist school of thought. I am, as a chairman of the Human Rights Committee of Ukrainian Parliament, cannot allow be like that. So that's why what we are facing now, we're facing now an ongoing a humanitarian catastrophe in the center of Europe, as you said. Ukraine belongs to Europe. So, and this is one yet more argument that has to be addressed. And the straitjacket of Minsk is not sufficient to address this issue. Yes, it is required, and I refer now to the question what Ukraine's side could do more. Ukraine's side could do more to be much more consistent, efficient, as far as the issue of the internally displaced persons are concerned. This is 1.7, there's official figures, one could doubt this, but this is an issue. And those people, they didn't leave Donbass when their houses were shelled to go to other countries. They left for Ukraine. So the loyalty of these people, their beliefs in the future of Ukraine, something that the responsible government should address in a responsible manner. This is not the case yet. The other things that has to be delivered, this is, again, goes beyond Minsk, but I cannot but agree with those in the first panel who said that successful Ukraine, or more successful Ukraine than it is now, so would be a major game changer in terms of perception. Because if it continues like that, we are running the risk to strengthen the fuel perception of Ukraine that states that is not just underperforming, but going along this line to become a failed state, which is not in the interest of anybody, including Russia. And I respect very much also a very clear point in terms of when Sergei mentioned Russia intervened, yes. And he said, but I would put it, Russia intervened, yes, full stop. Then if this is the case, then I think the major challenge for all us, and again within the Minsk arrangement, it's necessary but not sufficient. We have to try to be responsible and to implement, extract what is possible from Minsk, but also to consider what else needs to be done. In the near-term future, conditions sine qua non not to allow this situation to become hot are the following. Concentration on the security package with much more openness and responsibility in terms of the international observers and monitors to verify all the elements of this security package. Second, continuation of the sanctions, which is an important not just because of the efficiency of this diplomatic instrument, but for the unity within the Europe and between the Europe and the United States. And third element of that, which is also important, to overcome the current stalemate inside Ukraine in terms of its own internal domestic political situation. The current status quo does not equal stability. It becomes more and more counterproductive. So if we will resume this dynamism internal from Ukraine, changing status quo through a democratic political process, Ukraine will be much more viable and dynamic partner in Minsk or other arrangements, broader arrangements, to solve the conflict.
Grigory, Sergei, you have given us an enormously rich discussion. I think we have a plan, an alternative, a Minsk and beyond, which I'm sure our next panel can tackle. But please join me in thanking Grigory and Sergei for a great conversation.
Thank you.
You guys were great.